Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Today we are getting back to work on our ultimate SG style guitar kit build from Solo Music Gear. This is the one with the flame maple top where we fade from our nice kind of partially transparent flame maple look here into an opaque black at the top per the customer's order. It's looking pretty good so far. Semi-gloss finish. Pretty happy with it. So in today's video we are doing the fretboard, we're doing the neck work, and then next time we're going to come in and finish assembling it and do our demo. We're almost done this guy. As with any kit build, it is important to check your frets, check your neck, and all of that before you do your final assembly, because usually there's going to be some work required. Now this one looks pretty good, but we still need to test everything out and make sure, and we're probably going to end up doing a little bit of leveling and then some crowning and polishing after. It's an important step to make sure your neck feels like a beautiful, high quality instrument and plays properly, and we want to make sure that there are no high frets or anything like that that are going to cause us problems down the road. We are also changing the nut on this one, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that off now. We'll show you how to do that, and that's going to make our leveling job just that much easier. Let's get to it. Okay, so in terms of dealing with the nut here, I left that on throughout the finishing process, but now it's time for it to come off. And we need to make sure that there's no paint stuck to it that's going to tear away when we knock it off of here. Otherwise, we run the risk of knocking this off and having it take a bunch of paint with it, having it chip stuff. Sorry, might be too close there. The joys of cameras. So I'm going to carefully kind of cut around, work my way under there, and separate it a bit that way. And if we can, we'll just separate it right off of the guitar with the razor blade, but it should be glued in obviously. So if that's not going to work for us, we will come in with a hammer basically and knock it off of there. I do want to separate it as much as possible. You also want to separate it from the fretboard. Just kind of make sure that there's nothing really connected up there sticking it in place, because otherwise you run the risk of tearing a little chunk out of your fretboard, and we want to avoid that as well. Obviously this is a careful process, so I'm using a flat razor blade for it. You can use a hobby knife or a different X-Acto knife if you need to, but I like the flat ones because I can kind of jam them into these spaces when I need to and not have to worry about the shape of them being a problem. All right, I feel like that has been diligently separated now. So I'm just going to take a leveling beam and knock it off of there. There we go. Nice clean line. And because we try to separate underneath, everything looks good. Good and clean for our new piece. Throw that plastic one away now. All right. Yep. There's just a little edge of glue there, so I'm just going to gently smooth that off. Not that it's a big deal. And that should be good to go for our new one. So next up, what we need to do is make sure that all of these frets are level. And like I said, we're going to crown and polish them probably. We're at least going to polish them if everything's perfect. We'll do that part. They're nicely crowned already, but we need to make sure they're good and level. And these kits, I've never had a problem with one of them coming with a fret lifted, but it is possible that that could happen. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to make sure I've got the right call on here. We're going to check them all. And by check them all, I mean we're going to press them all first, just to make sure. I'm going to make sure I've got, so what I'm using for this is Solo Music Gear's fret press. You can also use a hammer and a fret setter, but this is, do I have the right radius? Yes, I do. Very nice. This is, in my opinion, the best tool for the job, excluding if you go to Solo Music Gear and pick up a call like this to hold their, a call like this to hold their fret calls. I think I'm getting the words wrong there, but if you pick up one of those that goes into a drill press, then that's a beautiful option as well and probably a little quicker. But this is going to do this job nicely. So I'm going to start at the top here. I'm just going to make sure that this is set actually on my fret. And for each one, I'm just going to give it a squeeze. I'm going to make sure that my frets are set in there real nice so that I don't get a false problem read, if you will, for one of them being too high when really it's just lifted a bit. I think this is probably too deep. Let's use a flatter one. Yeah, so I don't want to go through here and accidentally think that one of my frets is high when really it's just lifted out of the fretboard a little bit. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Make sure you get this thing set up properly before you start playing around. There we go. So once it's set up properly, it's a nice quick endeavor. That's all going to be part of the video. You guys are going to see how foolish I am. There we go. Once you've got those all pressed in there, it's time to see if there are actually any high spots, and we do that using a fret rocker. Now you can get a fret rocker from a lot of different places. Solo Music Gear has them. You can grab one of those through the affiliate link in the description, just like the press, if you want. Philadelphia Luthier has them. They're good too. I mean, as long as the edges are straight, we're good. Skyscraper guitars, that's what I've got here. This, let me see if I can focus on it again. This thing's beautiful. It's got, well, it's just a damn good looking tool, and it's got these options on the side for checking height, so it's got a little gauge. So I love this thing. I love Skyscraper's fret leveling tools, so I'm going to use their beams too. So what you do is you find the appropriate length of section. That's why they're cut in this shape, because as you make your way up the fretboard, the frets get closer and closer together, and you have to use the smaller sides. And you bridge 3 frets, and then you see if it rocks. So if it's perfectly solid, it means that either the frets are level or the middle one is low, right? So here, we're not getting any rock. Here, we're not getting any rock. Here, we are. So if this one was low, we'd get rock here as well. It's not, so this guy's high, which means we're gonna have to level. And you can work your way down the fretboard doing this. You switch, right? But really, unless you've only got one high fret and you've got one of the StewMax fret kissers, you're gonna have to level the whole board anyway. Do we have only one high fret? Jeez, what a day. Anyway, we're gonna do a full leveling job on this guy anyway. So there we go. Check them for level. If they're all good, you can move straight to the polishing process unless you feel the need to mess with your crowning. These are very close, but not perfect. So we're gonna level them. Now there's a very good chance you've seen me do this before. Not much has changed in terms of my process. But yeah, I'm gonna do it again. So we're gonna start off by marking off the tops of the frets. Be really careful. Do not draw on your fretboard with Sharpie. You will regret it. If you're worried, tape off your entire fretboard. I don't do that anymore, but when I first started out, I did. It's not a bad idea. If you are gonna tape off your entire fretboard, I highly recommend that you start by running a line of tape down either side and then do your tape across the top afterward. That way, you can peel off that bottom one and it should help you lift all of them up. Makes it much easier and much faster to untape your fretboard after. I don't tape off my entire fretboard for these jobs anymore. I find it to be a bit of a waste of tape, and I've got enough practice at this that I don't need to. So I start off here by marking the tops of my frets with a Sharpie. That is key. You always want to do that. The reason I do that is because I need to level them, but I only want to level them as much as I absolutely have to. I don't want to take any more off the top of the frets than I need to, because the more I sand the tops of the frets, the more work it's going to be to crown them after, and the more material I'm going to lose. So what I'm going to do is mark them all, and this has to happen a couple times during this process. Mark them all, and then I'm going to use a fret leveling beam, also from Skyscraper. Again, you can get those from a lot of places too. Solo's got them. I'm going to get one, I think, from Crimson in the next little while, and we'll do like a fret leveling beam shootout or something like that. But anyway, I'm going to take my fret leveling beam, and I'm going to start leveling, carefully respecting the radius of the fretboard, of course. And I'm only going to take off enough that I have silver across the top of all these frets. So just enough to remove the Sharpie from the tops of all these frets. You can also use a radius beam or a radius block to do this, but they have to be relatively long. So I don't do that because my radius block is short, and it's just, yeah, I just use a beam. It's not that hard. There are two sides. When you get these Skyscraper beams, they come with 2 grits and adhesive back paper. But when I do this myself, I like to have something in the range of like a 220 grit if I need to do any rough work, and then like a 400 or 600 for the easier work. I'm going to try this real quick with the fine grit paper, and I'm going to hope that I can do this job without moving to the rougher grit. But let's find out. So we've kind of proven our point here. This one, as you recall, it rocked over top of, that's our 2nd fret. So if we take a look now, the top of that is all cleaned off because that was higher. Whereas the top of fret number 1, still completely blue. That might have even been a bit low. And the top of fret number 3, still mostly blue. Makes sense. So we keep doing that until all of the tops are cleaned off. Not perfectly clean, but until there's a nice thin silver line on the tops of all of them. Okay, so now that we've got them all sorted out, and they're looking nice and silver in a very thin line on the top of most of them, but on a few of these, they were clearly a little higher, so they're looking thicker, the flat silver area on the top. Anyway, now that we've got that done, it's time to crown them. So in order to do this, we're doing the opposite actually. We are still going to start by marking them, but this time we're going to use a crowning file, and instead of trying to get it so that the top of these things is silver, we're going to do precisely the opposite. We're going to crown them so that there's just a very thin, as thin as possible, blue line left on top. So this time, they're all leveled already. We don't want to take anything else off the top. What we want to do is leave a nice spot at the top for the note to intonate, for the string to contact, and we want the rest to fall away from there, either in kind of a triangle or in a crown, a rounded crown. And that shape will depend on how you like to do this. There are many different ways to approach this. There are the more angular files, like the like StuMax Z file, whatever, that kind of thing. There are the more rounded files, like the Hosco ones that I use generally. There are other options for doing this by hand. So for example, if I have it here, oh yeah, I did a video on how to do a cheap fret crowning tool a while back. Guns and Guitars did a similar one. This has a flat space right here, and you can go in and run that along your fretboard and angle the top of your fret and slowly kind of round it off, or just angle it, whatever you prefer. What I'm going to be using for this guy is my fret crowning file from Hosco that I got through Solo Music Gear. Big surprise. This has 3 different sizes available. So it's got 3 different sides, and you want to pick the appropriate one. So for us, it's a number 2. And again, respecting the radius of the fretboard, you go over it and file it and take it down so that there's just a thin line on the top. Now these are fairly rounded, Again, that is a good thing if that's what you're looking for. Not everybody wants the top of their fret really rounded like that. Some people prefer them to be more angular. All right, this second one has a lot more that needs a little bit more rounding. I'll show you what these look like after I've done them all. I don't suppose you need to sit there and watch me do that for the next 15 minutes. Those are all nice and crowned now. As you saw, they've got a beautiful thin line across the top. So our next step is to make sure that all of our fret ends are good. So when we did our leveling, those got a little bit roughed up, as they do. So now we get to deal with those. I'm using another Hosco tool here from Solo Music Gear. This one has a smooth back on it with a little bit of a curve to protect the fretboard. On the inside, it's got a concave surface. They come in a set of three. With 3 different sizes, much like that fret crowning tool. And then the sides are also a file. So what I do here is I come at a fret, let's do this one. Come at a fret from the side. I got the back resting on the corner here right against it. And I gently round over the corner of the fret from both sides, while making sure that only the smooth side ever contacts the fretboard, because we don't want to damage the fretboard. Again, if you're new at this, tape off your fretboard, and then you can use the concave side to come in from the top and just gently do the rest of that corner, and we end up with a nicely rounded fret at the end. And that's really all there is to it. So I like to go in and do that in stages. So I come in and round one side of each fret, and I'm kind of turning it as I go. You'll get the hang of it. I've already done that one. No, it wasn't that one. These actually look pretty good. Did that one. So I go through and basically do the whole side of the fretboard like that. And then I come in from the other side. You can flip your guitar and your neck around depending on how you are with using both hands. I'm kind of set up this way to demonstrate it, but I will often switch hands as I work my way through this process. And that's about as long as that takes, and then I come in from the top, do a little round off from the top. That one's done. And that's it. So I go down the fretboard that way, and then I come in, flip the guitar around, and do the other side. And then we get to move on to the polishing. So I'm not going to make you watch me do all of that. I'll do that off camera, and then we'll come back and do the polishing. All right. Edges are nicely rounded now, and everything's feeling good and comfortable. Now the last step here is we need to get these frets polished up. Well, pretty much the last step. We need to get them all smoothed out and nice. So we did all our rounding work, but now they've still got a little bit of Sharpie, that line on the top. We need to get rid of that, and we need to get them as nice and smooth as possible, because that's what's going to make them play as nicely as possible. So for that, you can use a number of things. You can use sandpaper. Some people do that, of course. Scotch-Brite. Some people use steel wool. I recommend against that because the steel wool fibers can get under your frets and mess with them. It's also an instrument that's got magnets in it, so I don't really want steel fibers everywhere. So I don't use steel wool, but I do use fret erasers, and those are my preferred method. You can also use micro mesh pads and that sort of thing. These are Hosco fret erasers from Solo Music Gear, of course. I've got 4 different grits here, 150, 180, 400, and 1000. So I'm going to start at the 180. I don't use the 150 very often because I usually don't need to. I'm just going to do a few passes over top of this, get everything cleaned up and nice and smooth. Now again, if you haven't done this or you're not confident that you can do it without messing up your fretboard, tape off your fretboard. You can tape off your fretboard once and keep it taped off for the entire process here. But I do this all the time, so I don't tape off my fretboard. Doesn't take long. We go over it with each of these grits. Start with the, in this case I'm using the 180. Like I said, I didn't feel the need to use the 150, and then I'll move up to 400 and then 1000. So again, this is a fairly quick process. You just want to make sure that you're not nicking your fretboard or rubbing against your fretboard too much when you do it. And that's pretty easy to avoid. These fret erasers don't wear down all that quickly. They will eventually develop a groove in them, which isn't a problem. It's actually a good thing. It kind of makes it easier for you to hit the entire top of the fret at once. But if that groove gets too deep, then you start abrading your fretboard, and you don't really want that. So when that happens, it's time to move over on the fret eraser or change sides or something like that to make sure that you're not doing that. Now again, it takes quite a while to have your fret eraser wear down like that. So if you're picking something like this up to do, a few projects at home, a few kit builds, probably not a big deal. You may never have to change sides on them. But if you are doing a lot of these, you will eventually have to. So I just worked my way up through these grits here, and I'm at 1000 grit now. As you can see, this is the last one. And by the time I get done with this, this will be pretty well polished and looking pretty good. You can definitely go back in and polish it after, and there are a few ways to do that using a Dremel or a cloth and some compound, for example, like some Autosol compound that you've seen me use before. What I'm doing is just polishing off the tops of them real nice, which is the important part and is really all you need. That's where the strings are making contact. So I'm using a jeweler's compound on a strop that I made. So it's just a piece of wood that I made sure was honed nice and flat. And then I went in and glued a belt to it. And I've got the compound rubbed into the belt, much like you would see for, the green compound that you would use on a knife strop if you want to use it for the final stages of sharpening before moving on to your clean strop. This is the same kind of principle. And then I'm cleaning off the compound. I can do all of that without ever having to actually tape off the board, which is nice. This is my final step on the fretboard. I'm just going in with a little bit of oil. I'm going to go laterally like this and make sure that I've got every bit of it covered. And then I go over it lengthwise a few times and just basically buff it up a little bit. I'm using a little foam pad that I got from Mohawk here. It came with their fretboard oil. But there are lots of good fretboard oils out there, and frankly, there are lots of good oils that aren't designed for fretboards that work really well as well. My favorite is Modified Tongue Oil by Mohawk, but there's also the Crimson Oil, there's just straight mineral oil, there's lemon oil, there's linseed oil, there's tons of stuff, and they all work fine. And you'll be able to see at the end of this, the fretboard looks really nice, the frets look nicely rounded, crowned, and shiny, and this whole thing is ready to go, basically ready to play. So we're moving on in our next video to the final stages where we'll get this all assembled, and then you guys will get the usual disappointing demo of me fumbling my way through trying to play this thing, which I'm really looking forward to. And then we finally get to send it off to the very patient owner who has waited for me to go through this entire process and I'm sure he's looking forward to it as well. So yeah, we are almost there. Finally. Alright guys, that is it for this one. That fretboard is looking awesome, nice and shiny. I put a little bit of oil on there, so the fretboard and the frets are looking good. And yeah, nice and comfy. Things should play well. As always guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. That is it for this one, but don't forget to subscribe because next time we're going to finish this guy up, get it all put together, and demo it. And that should be coming fairly soon. So again, thanks for watching. Hope you liked it. If you did, please feel free to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.